My name is John Naderi, aka Nads, worst nickname in the automotive industry. I guess I got my start at Super Street Magazine. Before that, I did a couple small magazines. I did something called Overboost, which I'm very proud of. It was doing .com before there was a .com. But my big break was at Super Street. I was editor-in-chief there for 7 years. Was fortunate enough to be there during the Fast and the Furious years. I was a car consultant in one of the movies. I got to help bring drifting to the United States. I brought the first Time Attack to the United States. I brought something called VIP sedans to the United States, which I really hoped would stick, but didn't. Since then, I've been involved heavily with Time Attack. I've done stuff with Car Domain, Street Fire. I worked at Redline. I founded Global Time Attack. I did the first Gymkhana USA event here, which is where I met Ken Block, which brought me back to where I am at Hoonigan. This is actually my second tour at Hoonigan. I had 3 years, or not, I guess it was about 3 years at Saatchi & Saatchi working on the Toyota account, which was a soul-crushing experience. And fortunately, Brian Scotto brought me back and saved me, and now we're doing daily transmission and Gymkhana files on Amazon and experiential and something called Twitch, which I'm unentirely sure. And now I'm on something called a podcast, which again, something that I'm unentirely sure about. But I refer to myself as the world's oldest ricer is the best way to say who I am.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I would say that's one hell of an intro.
Oh,
My job here is done. Do you want to just grab the microphone and drop it?
Should I? Really?
Yeah.
It really looks really expensive. So.
It's okay. I got insurance on it. Okay, so let's dive right into your history with automotive. Take us back to where it all began.
Oh boy, I grew up in the Valley in the 1980s. There was a street called Van Nuys Boulevard where everybody used to cruise, and it was sort of an amalgam of 70s muscle cars, and then there was some weird little cars, BMW 2002s and Datsun 510s and 240Zs, and my era is unfortunately the Malaise era, the early 80s sort of stuff. Like, you know, there was the 280Z, which wasn't quite as cool as that 240Z, and the bumpers looked a little bit different, but it was that was what was happening when I was coming up, and there was 5.0 Mustangs and Buick Grand Nationals and Camaros, and my parents didn't want to get me any of that, so they got me a mini truck, which I proceeded to swap the engine and build it for street racing. And don't do that, kids, but you know, up in Mulholland and Sepulveda Pass, we would drive around and stay up all night and go to another area called Westwood, where everybody would actually cruise in Westwood and everything, back when that was a thing before the internet. And I don't know. I've just been a lifelong car fan. My dad grew up semi-wealthy. My dad had money when I was younger, and he wanted to get me a nicer car, and I didn't want a nice car. I said, I want to build my own car and start with something from scratch. And I started with a love for off-road and trucks and segued into sort of the mini truck ricer sport compact at the time, if you can call it that, world. And I just had a love for everything vehicular. Bigfoot was like the first vehicle that I could remember. And also, like, for some reason I had the 6-wheeled Tyrrell F1 car on my wall that I don't know why my dad got me an F1 car, but that like spurred my love for open wheel too as well. Been going to the Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach since before I could remember. And that just sort of took me down a path of street racing, which I mean, everybody sort of did back then, which is just, I'll credit it to not enough racetracks and nothing better to do. And just now knowing the danger of what it is and everything, just growing up and realizing how that was not the best thing to do. But, you know, we went to Gardena and City of Industry and Sylmar, and then led me into a group called Redline, which was Junior Asper and Orley and James Aldua and all these like names back then, and which took me to something called Battle of the Imports. And it just made me fall in love with wanting to do this for a living. And I went to school for communications. Along the way, my father, who was very wealthy, lost all his money. So I had to find a sustainable form of income for myself. And I thought, why not be an automotive journalist? That's the best way to make money and have fun. The making money part has been a challenge, but the having fun I've managed to stretch out over a number of decades. And I just applied to Peterson Publishing, which was, if anybody knows, Robert E. Peterson was the man who first put a girl in a bikini on the fender of a car and said, let's write about cars, let's build cars. He was the guy who essentially, him and Wally Parks invented the hot rod industry. And they started Hot Rod Magazine, and they later started Motor Trend Magazine. And Mr. Peterson had something called Peterson Publishing, which at the time when I finished in journalism school and communications, he had every car magazine in the books. So I back then you'd had to send letters of submission. So I want to say this was 1997. And I sent in letters just repeatedly, nonstop. And somebody gave me a chance. Donald Nosek, Max Speed magazine, said, come on in. And he said, I guess you'll do. And that was the extent of my interview. And I got in, and I later met the photographer, Fernando Escobar. And he had told me, he goes, I don't know how you did it, but there were literally hundreds of submissions. Wow. And somehow you rose to the top. At that point, I wrote the most saucy, insouciant cover letter ever. I said, you're probably not going to pick me because here's a stack of letters that I've sent before, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I really think your magazine could be better if you do these 3 things. And I basically told him what I wanted to build the magazine into, and it resonated with him. So he gave me a shot, and I ended up writing for that magazine, and that's where my career kind of got started. So that's what brought me all the way into print publishing back then.
Gotcha. What were those 3 suggestions? I'm curious.
Oh man, the 3 suggestions I said, the magazine was an offshoot of Super Street magazine. So this was Super Street had been around. It started in 1996, and by 1998, it was on again, off again, and almost put out of business and almost shuttered. But somebody believed in it. John Diana actually allowed the team. Matt Pearson, all kudos to him, the gentleman who started the magazine, the first editor of the magazine, and they really found their voice. And Max Speed was supposed to be an offshoot of Super Street that was supposed to say, okay, after you have your Civic and your Integra, you're going to level up and you're going to get maybe a European car, maybe these new cars called Lexuses and Infinities and everything. And people are starting to not quite tune them, but mild modifications. It's more for like the postgraduate sort of type of person. And he was sort of on that path. And there was another magazine that just came out at the time called Maxim. And I said, you really have to take this in what's called the laddie book direction and just go kind of full hot rod towards that. Just, I don't want to say potty humor, but just sort of like have fun with it and introduce a little bit more boys being boys sort of kind of an attitude to it.
A little bit of an edge.
Exactly. I said, if you're gonna appeal to these people are a little bit more sophisticated. The writing has to be a little bit more sophisticated, but it could also still be fun because you're trying to attract that Super Street kid who's kind of grown up. And the writing in Super Street, even from day one, the guys did a great job with it. So that's one of the things that I patterned my writing after. Very self-deprecating, very silly, very lighthearted. It's almost like we don't know what we're doing, but we know all the people in the industry who do know what they're doing, and we're going to introduce you and show you through our lens what these people do.
So what was your experience like coming right into that world, and especially writing about cars? And it sounds like you had this tremendous passion of cars before you even got into this whole journalism thing. Completely.
And I'm gonna lift open the fourth wall for a moment here and just say, like, my first week starting there, Donald was a longtime magazine editor, and he worked for like Personal Watercraft. Like back when people were doing jet skis, they had magazines about jet skis and everything. So he wasn't so much of a car guy, and I was a pretty core car guy. I wasn't as connected as I am now. I've been fortunate enough to be in the industry long enough that I know more people than what I know. So it's better to when I just say, this person knows what they're talking about. I will connect you to them. So I've become sort of more the connector. But back then I was writing a lot. I learned photography, and week one on the job, I won't say the product, but he gave me some product, and he goes, here, write a press release on this tire dressing. We need to promote it for the magazine. And I said, oh no, Donald, no, I tried this stuff. It doesn't really work. It creates something called sling, which actually like the dressing like flies off. It doesn't really, and it's too glossy. It doesn't quite protect your tires the way it should, the way a tire dressing should. And he said, they're an advertiser. I don't care. Write something nice about them. And it just shattered everything I learned about the fourth estate. And I just went, oh no. And so you learn very quickly that relationship between advertiser and audience. And I've always tried to put the audience first and foremost, but at times it can be challenging, where I'm going to recall another story, and I could say this now because I believe statute of limitations is up on it. There was a gentleman by the name of Brian Horowitz. He owned a company called APC. He didn't invent clear corners, but he was the guy who brought clear corners to the masses.
Yeah, I remember APC.
So it started with a company, a car called the Toyota Altezza, which the IS300 was based on. And in Japan, it had a completely clear lens with a red center signal in it. And everybody in the US said, oh, I have to have clear corners. You just get back then it used to be ambers were the hot thing, but then it became clear corners. Brian like took this to the bank and just was printing money, but the products weren't that good. And the cars that they built were sort of off a little bit. Like it was hard to describe. The body kits weren't right. The wheel fitment wasn't right, but they spent so much money with us, and their advertising rep, my good friend, Mike Robledo, would always bring me out to Corona. We'd go to their big, vast, massive warehouse, and we'd sit down and have lunch with Brian, and he'd say, they want to get a car on the cover. So which car would be? And I really, back in the day, like the cover car was like our daily transmission video. It's like, what car is worthy enough to select to go on the cover that will go on the newsstand that will show everybody this is the first thing that you see about this magazine. So you had to pick the right color, the right car, the right parts, the right owner even. And we went to great lengths to suss out those different vehicles. And Brian just presented all of his cars. And I said, I don't know what to say. I can't be that asshole. Can I say that on this
Sure,
podcast?
you can say whatever you want.
Perfect. I love that. Poop, potty, pee. So this guy would say, any car you want. I brought Robledo aside and just said, I just can't do it. I can't pick a car. This is just, nothing is right. So they said, just tell us what you want us to build. I'm like, you want to know what I want you to build? Signal Auto in Japan. They have an S15. It's a 14 with a 15 face. And I go, the Majora paint, everything about it, from down to the wheels and everything. They go, okay, we got it. So the next month they had me come out, and they had done like an S14 with a 15 face on it. They did a strawberry face conversion and everything. Obviously had the APC clear corners in the rear. And it had the Volks on it too, but everything else about it was wrong. It was just the graphics and the color. When you mentioned the Fast and Furious graphics, it made me think about it. It was so crazy to see how people try to emulate the style and everything, but if you don't really have it, it's hard to emulate it if you're not part of the culture. And that's long-winded tangent. That's who Donald was as an editor, and that who I also was as an editor. I'm almost too core of a car guy to where people will go, oh, the yellow always plays best. But if I see like a forest green car that I think has the parts on it or something like that, I'll call attention to that. And for better or for worse, I never took that role lightly, and I still don't to this day, because I don't want to call us arbiters of style, but essentially we're the megaphone of what is calling attention to what could potentially create the new trends. And I don't want to say I'm a trendsetter or at any of that. I don't want to ever put myself up on that pedestal, because I look to people who are younger, cooler, better, faster, stronger than me, but I find them and to where they'll just be doing something and don't have access to the microphone or the megaphone that we have. So I take that very seriously. And even back then I made a very big deal about finding all of that and pushing and trying to get something different, something new, something out there. Sometimes it completely backfired on me. For instance, one time, I want to say it was December of 2002. It was, there was something called drifting in Japan that I was very excited about. And there was a company that I worked closely with called HKS. And there was a driver called Nobuteru Taniguchi that no one had ever heard of.
Yeah.
And he had won something called the D1 Grand Prix that no one had ever heard of. And he had a red S15 on super advan wheels with this foil graphic to it. And I said, that is everything that screams Japan. That's, it had the Vertex kit on it back in the day. It was so perfect. Front mount intercore, V mount to it. Like no one was doing this, The SR20 that was set down, the tunneled front fenders and everything. We traveled all the way to Japan. My photographer, Wes Allison, and I shot it. Beautiful photography, red on a green background. It was just perfect for Christmas and everything, Apologies to everybody, every other denomination out there. I don't know if we're allowed to say that anymore. But it tanked. It was one of the worst selling issues that I'd ever done.
Wow.
And everybody had said, all my bosses said, never do, what are those cars called again? Drift cars. Never do that again, Nads. Okay, you got it. Yeah, I guess, And I was almost like too soon junior sort of moment where I just went, I got so excited about something and I went and something. I have ideas now to this day that I sit on because I'm like, we're not ready for the, Tesla time attack car yet, which is ironic that I say that because there is a Tesla that just ran in Super Lap Battle. I just called the attention to that. But so sometimes I feel like even now with Brian and the team, everybody here at Hoonigan, I sit on some of the ideas or some of the cars that I have and I wait and I let them percolate a little bit and I almost let someone else call attention to it and I have it in my back pocket and I go, yes, now's the time. I mean, when I left, the thing that caused me to leave Super Street is I went to go put videos up on something called YouTube in 2007 and it failed miserably because in 2008, the entire infrastructure closed and people still tell me, oh, I loved Rice Boy TV. I love the videos. We're putting videos up every single day. discovered a kid called Will Rogie, who's one of the cinematographers that works on the Gymkhana franchise now. And Brian had since brought him on board. Day one, that when I came back here to Hoonigan, I walked in, I was looking around and going, wow, this is amazing. We're putting videos up every day. And Will was here and he looked at me because he was with me at Rice Boy and he said, isn't it funny that now we're back here again? I'm like, yeah, except it's someone else's business now. It's not my business. So that stings a little bit, but you know, I did an event called Gymkhana USA with Ken Takahashi, and all of 40 cars showed up, but 2 of those cars were a gentleman named Chris Forsberg with his Z completely stripped to the bone. It was like all the fenders and quarters were off of it and the doors were off, and he was just testing it. And there was a guy named Ken Block that showed up with a Subaru STI that said, I really like this. What is this? You know? And I said, you're Ken Block. He said, yeah, how do you know me? Because no one knew who he was. And I said, I read your book, Agents of Change, you know, and I'm a big fan of your brand and everything. And that's how we struck up our relationship.
Wow.
So that was a whole crazy, weird, rambling, non sequitur of an answer. But that's essentially how I got started in magazines.
That's my favorite kind of answer. I've spoken to a few journalists, and especially now where things are a little bit freer, you can kind of express your true opinion. But prior to, we'll say, the interwebs, magazines were such a rigid model.
Completely.
Yeah, you had to basically appease the advertiser and not necessarily the customer.
Completely.
So, and you kind of sort of answered this, but I want you to go a little bit deeper because, you know, they say journalistic integrity, and there's not a lot of journalistic integrity if you have to kind of be one-sided, right? Where you just have to write how good something is, and like you mentioned, how bad it really is, but you got to make it good.
Completely.
Yeah. So how did you combat that internally?
Oh, I mean, like I said, like so crestfallen with just that little tire dressing thing, but I don't work there anymore, so I can go ahead and say it. 1 year, Motor Trend's Car of the Year was a Buick LaCrosse. So if that doesn't tell you about, you know, advertising dollars driving it, what does, you know? I mean, it is what it is. You know, it's like, we're not working for the gray lady, anything like that, you know? So, it's just one of those things where you just have to resign yourself to serving the audience first and foremost and appeasing your masters, you know, because that's why I've done so well over the years and now it's super ironic because now the role that I find myself in here after my stint at Saatchi, one of the reasons Brian brought me back, he said, you're a core guard guy, you know the industry really well, but you also spent 3 years on the other side of the wall working in advertising for the world's largest automaker. So we want to get into that client-based work. So that's one of the things that I've been helping work on now. But I temper myself between, and I love our biz dev guys. In fact, Vin is the other biz dev guy. So I love working with Vin. But for that group, they will take a call from someone and go, yeah, hey, we're going to do something on this brand. But one of the beauties of Hoonigan is that we won't work on a brand that doesn't work for us. So we won't work for a wheel company that's like a knockoff wheel company or not necessarily a quality product or a well-designed product or something that we don't believe in or we wouldn't put on our own vehicles or we wouldn't truly believe in. So that's one of the joys of working at Hoonigan. But one of the things that I learned all the years of working for, you know, Source Interlink, Prime Media, Peterson, all the names that it's been over the years. I think it's 10 Enthusiast Network now or Discovery or Velocity or Motor Trend Network or whatever they're calling it these days. That world was really kind of put you through a meat grinder, so to speak. You have to really know that you have to always serve your audience, you know?
Right.
You have to, but you did have to, you couldn't quite, there was no exposés on fake body kits or anything. Some of the fake body kit manufacturers were our biggest advertisers, but you could tell sometimes when we didn't write something about someone, the silence was deafening, you know? And the APC exam. And I love you, Brian. You know, I hope they're not listening to this. And if you are, I do love you. You know, he was a great guy for the industry, but at the same time, it was like when companies like that come through,
right,
it sort of makes it hard to swallow.
Sure.
You know, you just have to balance your sensibilities. And also too, I think about like my younger self, and now I'm an old man now. I have a 12-year-old son. I think about the products that he likes and what he does and the way he consumes media, which it's such a different world now, you know? So to see that, I always think about, like, even back then I thought about, like, if and when I ever had kids, what would they want and how would they want to be spoken to? And you have, like, it's almost a duty that you have to serve that audience, but you do have to, you know, They're not the ones that keep the lights on as much as everybody gets excited. I support your magazine. I'm like, thanks. You spent $3.25. I've got a $10 million budget to hit, So it wasn't really in the subscription model where you make money, or the newsstand model. You make money. Back then you made money on advertisers, obviously.
How were you able to, and I don't want to kind of put you on the spot and tell you to give up your secret sauce, because obviously you're doing business development here as well, but like, what goes on in your head when you're thinking about these ideas? Because clearly, in many different ways, you're way ahead of your time. The whole drifting thing, the YouTube thing. So what goes on in your head? Like, what kind of creativity are you working with here to think of those ideas?
Well, I'm sure you've probably done, I'm sure we'll hear something with certain Mr. Brian Scotto. He likes to say there's something about creators, but he'll probably admit this too. But there's everything about being a creator is all plagiarism. There's no more original ideas. I think there's the old Hollywood saw that says there's only 17 original screenplays running around. It's the same thing with everything. And sometimes it's funny because we get angry when someone else will say, "Oh, they're referring to themselves as this or that. We came up with that." And I'm like, we really didn't. There was something that came up with that before. I love the way people say, "Oh, you ripped off Rocket Bunny," and you're like, really? You ripped off Peter Brock from back in the day when they were doing overfenders on 510s. It's nothing is original. It's like everything relates to an earlier time or a different industry. To me, what I love about consuming media is I love to look elsewhere for something. Even there's something as silly as we're talking about doing holiday cards, and they did something on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and they did something on the black tree. A black Christmas tree is all the rage. Nobody wants green trees or silver trees, are doing black trees now. And they did a tree, and they did one of the correspondents, an African-American girl, and they dressed her up with ornaments and everything. And I'm like, I want to make her the black tree, And I'm like, right. I just want to steal that idea and apply it to what we do,
Sure.
Silly stuff like that. It's just everything, I just love consuming it, in my time in advertising, really opened my eyes to everything. It's just such a, there's no such thing as original ideas anymore.
Sure.
The best creative directors in the advertising industry have 5 good ideas, and they take them with them to every single shop. And if you're at a shop for more than a year, you're a dinosaur. I was already super old when I started in there, and I was just happy doing what I did there. But you're supposed to bounce around and move around. I didn't really want to bounce around and move around, but I thrived myself on trying to keep coming up with new ideas, because now I saw people, every time a new creative director would start, when I was over at Enocean, we did this. When I was over at 72 and Sunny, we did this, And I'm like, so you mean you're just taking, maybe it's not even your idea, but someone else's idea, and you're going to apply it from the Jaguar account to the Toyota account, And you could see it when you see TV commercials. I mean, how many commercials have we seen where the car is driving on that stretch of Pacific Coast Highway north of county line between that rock outcropping? It's like everyone just jumps on the same bandwagon,
Right. Yeah.
So I always try to get outside of that box. I mean, obviously, one thing I would advise to young creators or young journalists or anything, you have to know the rules before you break them. So you have to know where the parameters are before. You can't push the envelope if you don't know where the envelope is. If you're so far off base, sometimes I found with my career, you go way too far ahead or way too left or right field, then people have lost the plot. They can't keep up with you. So, or you're not in the right place where the audience is.
Sure.
So you need to know where that audience is, where the envelope is, the fence, whatever you want to call it. And you just push that boundary from there.
Much of what we've talked about so far, we've talked about drifting, we've talked about Super Street. All of these things come from one place, and that's Japan.
And
yes.
you were talking about your mini truck as well. The mini truck thing, I think, is also a Japanese thing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Completely.
So what drew you to the land of the rising sun?
I extend most of that to a gentleman named Scott Crogwell at overboost.com. Mm-hmm. They had a little tiny website that they were doing 3 images and a line of text in a vertical plane on a website that predated anything that Autoblog or Jalopnik was ever doing.
Sure.
And it was just amazing. And they had all of 26,000 followers. And I was working at max speed, and I was trying to be the editor, but at the time I was too young, and they passed me up in the editor. My ego got a hold of me, and they got me at the right time, and they go, we will give you, I think I was making $28,000 a year back then. They go, we will give you $33,000 a year. And I said, sign, done, let's do this. And so I went and worked with them, and odd story, odd sidebar. I was shooting with a Canon film camera back then because that's what we shot back then. And they gave me something that was called a digital camera. And it was a Nikon Coolpix 900 with a little swivel back and everything. And I said, where do I put my lenses? Where do my big, I guess I'm overcompensating for something, but I really wanted a long lens. And I said, where do I put my lenses? And they go, what lenses? And I held up my Canon lenses and they go, no, those don't work with that. There's no such thing as a digital single lens reflex camera. This is your camera. So I had to shoot with this little tiny camera. And I went from having this big backpack and this Pelican case to like this little man purse that I had to carry with, and I'd take my little camera out and I'd have the SD card and everything. But we go around, we start shooting, and they go, we want to bring you to Tokyo Auto Salon. And I said, oh, I've heard of it, but I don't know, They go, you'll love it. We went last year. And they're not so much journalists as enthusiasts. So they went last year and they showed me their pictures and I go, oh, it seems okay. But then when I went, it just opened up my eyes and I said, oh my God, we have to stay here all 3 days and we're going to shoot every single car. I don't care if we just shoot right front 3/4 angles and just knock out as many cars as we can. I just want to show this to the world. We took our growth back then. No one was on the internet. We went from like 26,000 monthly uniques to like 126,000 in like a period of just doing Tokyo Auto Salon coverage. We followed these guys called, I want to say they were called Midnight Racing, and they were the guys who ran on the Wangan Expressway. And I learned all about Rainbow Bridge and Daikoku Parkway and all the areas that everybody knows are so prevalent now. But I actually got to see that before the video game era. And I shot all of this with a Coolpix in the middle of the night, freezing in Japan and in January. And Super Street was at the time was also going, but they weren't. I don't know. The guys at Super Street before me were not quite as voracious media hounds as I were. They would go and they would hang out with the Signal Auto guys or the Gretty guys or the Trust guys. And they drive a car and they take a picture and they write a story, and the writing was amazing, but they never really got into it. When I got there, I said, I want to make friends with everybody from Smokey Nagata to Yokomaku at Velside to, even Mr. Hasagawa at HKS. And when I got to Super Street, I had all those, I received all those contacts just as a legacy, thanks to Matt Pearson and Rich Chang for the roads that they paved before me. And I just took it and just ran with it and just, we would go to Japan, and it was towards the end of my tenure there. We would go and we would start in this auto salon's always like first or second week of January, and we would spend an additional 2 weeks just going around the countryside and just trying to shoot as many things as possible. Went to D1 Grand Prix events, went to the scuba circuit to shoot something called Time Attack, and that's where I fell in love with Time Attack and everything. But I do give my credit to Rich Chang for my love for Time Attack, because in the April 2001 issue, right before I started, he had shot a car called the HKS Track Attack Altezza, which was like a carbon fiber, nutty silhouette chassis of a car that I didn't know what it did, but I loved the name Time Attack. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. It's like one car going against the clock to set a record. And something about that to this day, I still find so appealing.
Yeah. You mentioned Smokey Nagata. When you were mentioning those names, I got goosebumps because I mentioned I grew up on this stuff. The 200-mile-an-hour Supra and
completely.
Yeah. Speaking of the 200-mile-an-hour Supra, because I think the roads that you mentioned, that's where they did that, right?
They did. Yeah. That was all on, public highways. And
yeah,
I've been in cars that have gone that fast, and on the road, it's an eerie, odd, scary. I've done it both in Japan and both in Germany on the Autobahn. And the passing rate with which it's ridiculously irresponsible. And some areas in Germany are obviously unrestricted, but there are areas also in Japan that are not quite unrestricted, but it used to be sort of a gentleman's agreement. It's that BS scene from Tokyo Drift where, he's driving with Han and they go past police cars are only rated to 186 kilometers. If you're going faster, they don't even bother chasing. I don't know if it's that bad, but it's just sort of that unwritten law where, okay, if you're not in the Yakuza and you're not like a full blown, running a, some sort of shop out of the back of a pachinko parlor, you're good with us, even if, as long as you don't kill anybody and everything. That was back then. It's obviously changed now, but so we would go out and meet with those guys. But it was funny when I mentioned Smokey, I had a special affinity because I'm, as much as like, since I started here at Hoonigan, I've become known as a Honda daddy, and I'm not so much a Honda guy as a Toyota guy. I'm a much bigger Toyota fan than I'm a Honda fan. Yeah. Okay. So, which was a certain pleasure of me to work on Saatchi at the Toyota account. I'm like, I'm going to do such cool things. And they're like, here, write about this Prius. And I'm like, no. So for me, Smokey's cars were it. You know, like he had the gold Supra that back then Rich Chang shot was the gold Supra with the 3S GTE 4-cylinder engine in it and everything. And then I shot the Century car with the 12-cylinder in it, that with the V12 in it. And just all of the gold Supras were just nuts, you know? And then we'd shoot the white cars. And I don't know, there's another thing that I actually just learned. I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on the author's name, but somebody from Jalopnik just wrote a really great piece about the history of Top Secret. And I never knew this, but it was actually started. He was an engineer at Gretty at Trust, and he ran his tuning concern out the back door on the side after hours. So the joke was, it was like Top Secret Tuning. And that's where he came up with the name. The gold cars are actually the finished cars that are ready for clients. The white cars are still under development. So all the cars, all the years that I did this, and this is funny, this is why I say this, because I never knew this about Smokey, because I never had an interview with him. I never sat down with him. All the other Japanese tuning bosses, all of them would take us out for dinner, for drinks, after hours. We'd go out, stay out all night, cause all sorts of trouble, get up in the morning, take pictures of the cars, have such a great relationship. We'd bring them gifts. They'd have gifts for us. I had all the crazy JDM long jackets, which weren't that long on me because I'm much taller than the average Japanese man, but it was still pretty cool to get them. And just a great relationship. When I go to Top Secret, Smokey, because he was called Smokey because he smoked cigarettes voraciously, he would just kind of look at you through those tinted glasses and kind of give you a little nod. And he knew who we were and we knew who he was. And he would just be like, okay, no offense, but we're the freaking world's largest tuning magazine, all the way over from the United States to come to Chiba to visit him. He just gives us a little nod and puts his head back down and just gets to work like all he wanted to do was tune cars. And I had so much respect for him for that, but put more of his cars on the cover than most, but never really got to hang out with him or spend much time with him or ride in any of the cars. We would just shoot the cars in front of those now famous blue warehouse doors. And that was it. That was all we did. Sometimes we'd bring the cars inside and they're like, why do you want to shoot them in front of all the other half finished cars? And we're like, this is it. We shot pictures a little bit differently back then than everybody else did. So, but that's a weird story about Smokey and those top speed runs and everything. So all those runs I went on with Yokomaku at Velside, you know, Mad K at Signal, all those guys we would do it with. And Smokey was the one guy I wanted to drive with, and I never really got to do it. The one guy who cracked that was now a friend of mine, Andy Tipping. Everyone calls him Fly. He shot for Max Power UK, and he was the guy who always somehow got Smokey to take his cars out. He got pictures of them on the expressway and everything. So different world, but good times.
Yeah, it was a very different world. I remember him getting arrested in the UK
yes,
for doing that.
Exactly. And that was Fly who got him to come over with Max Power.
Wow.
And he went over and he tried to do a high speed run in the UK of all places.
So what caught you about Time Attack that you wanted to bring it here and that you wanted to expose it?
Again, going back to the Rich Chang, you know, the photography that Wes shot of the Track Attack Altezza, it had, you know, it was basically a GT300 chassis sitting on Advan RG wheels, all carbon fiber. And Rich was such an amazing wordsmith, the way he wrote about the spirit of Time Attack. And like, this car is built for one thing, smashing track records. And at the time, the time that it did was just off the chain. It was like a 55-1 or something along those lines. And, which now is crazy because it's been so eclipsed by that. But it beat the previous record, which was a high 56 by almost 2 seconds. And people looked at that and the entire Japanese tuning community turned their backs on it. And they said, this is not a traditional Time Attack car. And that made me kind of question, like, what is a traditional Time Attack car? And it's essentially taking what is a production vehicle with the standard uprights in the suspension. I'm getting a little nerdy about it, but it's like you want the standard uprights in the suspension and you want it on DOT tires. You don't want it on what are slicks on motorsport tires. So you build it to that sort of gentleman's agreement in Japan. And there was all sorts of weird sub records like fastest EK9 and fastest, you know, S15 and fastest R34 and everything. I thought that was really cool because they boiled it down to singular chassis, you know. It was almost like the old school, like import drag racing days. It's like street driven, you know, full interior, all throttle, no bottle, like all the caveats that you have on it.
Yeah.
So someone could be like fastest full interior FD3S, you know, and it's like, it was so weird, but I still loved the way that there was so much excitement over a single chassis and to see like that apples to apples comparison, how well that does. And then when you take that, go outside of that, and say, oh, here's how these times stack up against a GT500 car, a GT300 car on a certain nondescript circuit in Japan that was like a mix of high speed and technical prowess too. And the racer in me just looked at that car and go, that's just so wrong. I don't know what those things on the canards are. I'm like, a canard? That sounds so Formula One. I don't know what that is, but I want to put it on my car.
Right.
And I want to, that wing is so massive and there's a snout sticking out of the bottom. What's that called? That's called a splitter. I want a splitter. It's like it was everything about the aftermarket, like on steroids, essentially. It was just ultimately like a rat fink caricature of what the tuner market should be.
Right.
So it just took that and it's like everything was bulging and popping out and just too big for itself. It was larger than life in every way. And that to me, I'm like, these are the ultimate rice rockets, essentially. This is exactly what I want the tuner market to be. I was a big fan of drag racing and I love drag racing. I came up with drag racing, but at the same time, I'm like, this is more than that. This takes my love of like motorsport and combines it and brings it into our world, essentially. There was something called, I want to say like, oh man, New Speed had a little Accord wagon. It was like a North American Touring Car Championships or something. That was still pretty cool. It was a little tuner car. Dodge had a Stratus in there.
Yeah, I remember that.
There was a whole thing about it, but those weren't that cool. And they were also limited too. Yeah. So they were like, oh, there's a restrictor on this car. I'm like, what's a restrictor do? And then they're like, that's that little gooseneck that you see. I'm like, well, that's no fun, Where Time Attack was, we built this car and not only did we take the restrictor off, we put 5 turbos on it and then sprayed it with nitrous. And it's like, you're like, yes, that's what I want to see. Now I hate being such a purist, but now you go down to like World Time Attack Challenge and everything. And you have like cars like the Hammerhead or the RPS 968 that just set the record. I want to say it's like at a 119.5 or something like that, which is ludicrous for Eastern Creek. And it's almost gotten to the point where it's like, okay, have we reached the tipping point? So when you see something like that happen where it's just gone too far, I question like, and I love him to death. Andrew Brilliant, he's a friend of mine. He does a lot of the aero work and everything, but there's full tunnels underneath these cars now, and they're just barely production vehicles still.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of like, on the fence about the new age of Time Attack, but I'm still a huge fan of everything though. So
Time Attack right now is such a common thing. Tell me about the experience of bringing it here, because you've told me about like kind of thinking ahead and trying to bring something here, and then just the United States just doesn't want to grasp that
completely. So
did you have any issues with bringing it here and any pushback? How was the experience of bringing it here?
Oh man, yeah, not easy. I like I said, I was fortunate enough, with all credit to Matt Pearson and Rich Chang for like setting the stage, and managed to land at Super Street just as the movies were dropping. I mean, the movies came out in 2000. I was at Super Street in October of 01. I came back to Peterson, and so there was a lot of buzz. So the magazine took off. So the circulation went really well. And another weird side note, this is the level that they held me to. The numbers were pretty crazy. Just Super Street alone, we did, something like $8 million in advertising. I think it was the group. I'm sorry, that was the whole group. So there was a couple other magazines. There was Euro Tuner, and at the time we had purchased Y Visionary, McMullen Argus. So we got Sport Compact Car and European Car and Honda Tuning, and all those other books came under our umbrella. So our group on a whole was doing very well on the overall thing. And I think we made $8 million in 1 year. And they said, this is it. You're going to pass Hot Rod and Motor Trend in circulation. Wow. You're hockey sticking right now, the way the trend of Super Street is going. And I said, this is not, we will never be bigger than Hot Rod. We will never be bigger than Motor Trend. I promise you, this is a trend. Let's not like get too excited about it, but let's stick to our guns and stay the course. And they said, no. So you made 8 million in, 2003. In 2004, you need to make 10.5. And I said, it absolutely won't happen. Somehow we made 9.9 million. We almost hit it, but we didn't get there. And we made more money than we made the year prior. And everybody in the building on our side was super happy, except for my publisher, Howard Lim, and myself, because we knew that we didn't hit the number that we were supposed to hit. And he said, yeah, we're in trouble. He said, all the money that you got for your editorial budget, take it and spend it now. So I remember buying cameras and computers and everything for all my staff because our budgets are going to get cut next year. And we knew it. And it blew my mind because we still made more money. Meanwhile, if you go to the outdoor group, we had just purchased Surfer magazine and Skateboarder and all those. And we had these books, and that group, which I love those magazines, the paper was super glossy, the photography, they traveled all around the world. I'm like, oh, I want to work with those guys, you know? They had lost the year prior 1.5 million. Wow. And this last year, they only lost 1 million. So they were in the hole 1 million, but because they battled back, so they were $500,000 less in the hole, they had a big giant party on the beach. And it was like, they got them beer and everything. And I'm like, how come they're celebrating and we're getting held to task because we came up short? So this first year, 2004, that was the year that they said, absolutely not, no spending, nothing, you know? And I'd been trying to cover the time attack in Japan at Scuba, but it was super closed door. They wouldn't allow any media in, no photography, because it was made specifically for rev speed. And then there was other ones they did for video option as well. But the main one was the rev speed one. And that was the one that they made it for a VHS tape that they would sell on the newsstands in Japan. And that's the only way you could read about it, you know? And then occasionally after a while, it would come out in Option Magazine or Option 2. And so for us, I was trying to get in there. I was telling I'm like, take a picture. If I give you a camera, will you take some pictures and get us the film and everything? And they said, we don't want to, anger Sanishobo Publishing, which is the producers of it. So then I started thinking more and more, and I was talking to the people at Signal, and I said, what if we brought your car here and I got to bring other Japanese cars, and I somehow got budget? And they said, you know what? We're going to ship the car here and we'll put it up at SEMA, and it'll go in like the Mackin Industries booth for Volk Racing and everything. It was like the first time an R34 Skyline was going to come here to the US and everything. So they brought their car to the US and displayed it at back then it was called International Auto Salon. It was in, I want to say it was in Anaheim or Long Beach Convention Center. And they brought the car in and displayed it and everything. And I said, okay, well, because they're going to be bringing the car in, I'm going to rent a racetrack, and I'm gonna hold my own time attack. Take that, Sanishobo Publishing. And my publisher Howard says, there's no money. You absolutely cannot do this. I'm like, I'm gonna find a way to do this, and I'm gonna find money, and I'm gonna find some budget from some advertisers. And I think we got together with like some company called Spec Clutch and everything. David and Shelley, thank you very much, and a few other people that like sponsored on the first one. I think Yokohama Tire was also first because the yokes were on the Signal Auto car too. So it was good. It was a good partnership. And then I also made a vow. I put it out there. I said, anyone who can go faster than this car, we'll put it on the cover of the magazine. And I thought, for sure, if a car goes faster than the Signal Auto car, it's going to be spectacular. But I also panicked. I'm like, what if it's like a bone stock 911 Carrera or something that just beats this car or something? Yeah. So we said the car that wins will get on the cover of Super Street magazine. And we had Signal Auto come out there. But as I'm planning this event, I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it, I'm like, I want to go to Laguna Seca. So I call Laguna Seca, and they're like, yeah, we don't have very many DB free days. And I'm like, what's a DB free day? I don't know what a DB free day. I don't know what that means. And I said, sure. And I pretended like, oh yeah, DB free day, no DB free day. I know we got to pay extra for the DB. I got it. Yeah, I know what I'm talking about here. So I try to book the track, and they go, well, we only have a few days available, and it's like Christmas Day, I'm like, wait, what? And they go, Mother's Day and Christmas Day. I'm like, wait, what? And then they say, 5 years from now. So like every day is booked up, and I'm like, oh, okay. And if you want it, it's going to be $50,000 a day. And I'm like, okay, way out of my budget. So I worked around all the tracks, and I ended up, I can't remember who I spoke to, but I spoke to someone that says, you should check out Buttonwillow. And I'm like, what the heck is a Buttonwillow? And they're like, Buttonwillow Raceway Park. Look it up. Like they have something that's called, they have 2 circuits, but they have an East Loop and a West Loop. And there's something like, if you put the loops together, you could actually run them all together. It's like a little bit of a longer version of Scuba, and it's got like all the IndyCar teams test there. It's a really terrible track though. It's really bumpy and ruddy, but there's straightaways, there's tight technical corners, there's elevation change and everything. And I said, really? So I looked into it. I called them up, and they go, you want to do what? Yeah, I don't know, $1,500, And I'm like, you got it. So it was like so cheap. And I'm like, perfect. As I'm putting this together, I go, Howard, I need $1,500. And he goes, yeah, there's no budget for that. You can't do that unless you could figure out another way around it. He goes, you should also talk to a kid from Sport Compact Car, which was Jared Holstein. And he goes, he wants to do the same exact thing because he was the one kid at Sport Compact. Sport Compact Car at the time was like all degreed mechanical engineers. Josh Jaco, one of the editors there, drove faster than Scott Pruitt at Alexis Drive, which tells you like, and none of us could drive, none of us could wrench. And these guys were degreed engineers. Dave Coleman came up with something called the Dave point based on the Ackerman angle of a Nissan, which I don't even know what that is. And he invented an actual point, so these guys were way ahead of us. But the one guy, and the one thing that we had on them was we were essentially cooler than them. It's like, yeah, we didn't rattle can a Sentra in the garage of our house and do like a disco potato type cool turbo. But what we do know is we know the guys at Signal Auto, and that car will sell way more issues than you. So we were always kind of the fuck about guys, and they were always kind of the no fucking around guys. And there was one guy there that was kind of young and cool and a little bit different, and that was Jared Holstein. And he knew about Japanese cars, and him and I always used to talk offline, but we were kind of frenemies, and then they eventually ended up coming in underneath our group, and I was the editorial director of them, which was really awkward because I'm like, I can't tell you how to do what you do because you guys are way smarter than me. But Howard says, you can't do this because there's no money. But Jared Holstein at Sport Compact Car wants to do the same exact thing. So while I take credit for it, and Jared's not even really in the industry anymore, I think he's designing jewelry or something was the last I heard about him. So he's a super Renaissance man while I'm still messing about with cars. We partnered together. So the very first Time Attack was Super Street and Sport Compact Car. So they brought a certain amount of cars. We were able to split the rate for the track. We had Signal Auto come, and it was almost like Sport Compact Car cars versus Super Street cars. So the Sport Compact Car guys had some guy had a first gen MR2 that he managed to cobble together a homemade turbo. And then we had Signal Auto that had this 900 horsepower, RB26 that was like stroked out to an RB28, which was really weird back then. And, that's kind of how it started. And that's how we picked Buttonwillow, that shithole track in the middle of Bakersfield, so which became, for better or worse, the North American track of choice for Time Attack now. So that's sort of how it got started, is me trying to get into Japan and getting snuffed, and then me bringing it over here. So then eventually I brought the Mines R34, and then I brought the Cusco Evo 8, Evo 7. And then I brought the HKS, Scuba Record Breaker 2, which was also an Evo 7, which was in bare carbon fiber at the time and everything. So I brought that car over too. And that was the last car I brought over. And then, then I left and they kind of sort of kept it going. But then fortunately I got back together with Jason Deanhart and we did Global Time Attack together, and we sort of still keep that date alive. And now Jason's still doing it. Now he's doing something called Super Lap Battle USA, which is yet another new thing for Time Attack. But it's hanging on, but it's just, there used to be such a core group where you'd have Chris Rado and then the guys from FX Ken and FX Motorsports Development, Billy Johnson driving it. And then you had so many, like the big 4-car Sierra was a big car at the time and everything. And all those really big tuner cars. And I think Cole Paulson, he's since followed up with that. The Life Motorsport Sydney, that R35 that he has, but that car's sort of kind of semi-shuttered right now. So no one has this like big car, because to put it to you that way, like William All Young drives a 9th gen Civic, and that's the fastest car in North America right now.
And the second one too is the RSX. So it's just as
the RSX too is, and that's his street class car, which is still like it's just breaking street class and limited class records all over the place. So to me, love Will, and I love Hondas, and I'm a super big fan of his, but it's wrong. That car should not be the fastest car because the drivetrain configuration is not right. It should be. It should be. Technically, it should be a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car. Should be like that's the optimal car. But in Time Attack, all-wheel drives have since become big, and right now in Australia, which is arguably the fastest car, is the RPS 968. That's front engine rear-wheel drive. So that's sort of a difference. That's sort of a different setup. But I think it's either an FR, an MR, or an all-wheel drive that should be the fastest. But we have an FF, which is, as I become the Honda daddy, I seriously love that. And I love the fact too, that's the beauty of Time Attack, that you don't need to have. Look at me. I'm such an old man. I'm like, it should not be the fastest car. It should be an all-wheel drive car, which, I love the fact that Time Attack breaks rules. So weird, long-winded question. That's how Time Attack got started. So I'm confident in the future of Time Attack, but it has been a circuitous path to get to where it is right now. So
you mentioned that you had 2 stints at Hoonigan, and I want to make a transition to Hoonigan right now because this is where we are right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about those 2 stints, because one of the questions that I have for all 3 guys that I'm recording with today, you being one of them, was how the hell did you end up here?
Yes. Wow. Mine was left Super Street because I was going to go take the internet by storm and put videos up on the internet on YouTube, and no one knew what a YouTube was, and that was a tough road to hoe. And then the bottom fell out of the economy in 2008, and the company was shuttered. Found myself at Car Domain, Street Fire and Car Domain, and I brought some of my team over, and they said, we love what you're doing. We're doing videos too. We want you to do what you were doing at Raceway and do it with us, do a super street style show on Street Fire. The management wasn't right. It wasn't fit culturally. So we just found ourselves sort of awash over there. And I was watching the team sort of kind of fall apart and drift. A couple of us got laid off, and you could see that it wasn't in a good state. And I ended up hearing about something called 0 to 60 magazine. It was a really cool magazine back in the day. And knowing the editor a little bit, we knew each other, who we were, but I never met him. And someone had said, my sales guy, Mike Robledo, was with us all the way from Super Street. He was the sales guy at Raceway. He said, I got us a meeting with the team at 0 to 60 magazine, at Harris Publishing, and they might want to do a video-based project with us. So I went over and I met Brian Scotto, and I said, hey, I'm John. He goes, I know who you are. He goes, I read Super Street and everything. Begrudgingly, he admitted that he had heard of me. And I said, wow, that's cool. I love what you guys are doing at 0 to 60. If there's a way that he goes, yeah. So we kind of talked, exchanged business cards. It never led to everything. That was my very first time meeting Scotto. Since then, I've always kind of been in the mix with him, and somehow I got an invite to the very first Hoonigan party, an 11/1/11. And Hert's birthday also, the most important date in the company. And I was there for the launch of the company. I still to this day have the very first t-shirt, and, knew him and knew Ken and still worked with them. Never worked with them, but still knew of them. And we were all kind of, I'd always get the invites to the Gymkhana premieres and everything. And it came time, Ken had done, Gymkhana practice that led to Gymkhana 2 and 3 and 4. And when 5 came out in San Francisco, like, people were going crazy. ESPN approached him because he was a competitor at the X Games. And even before he was a competitor at the X Games as a rally driver, Ken's history with ESPN and the X Games is so deep that I like to call him the mayor of the X Games, that no one really knows who he is back then, but he was the guy who sponsored Travis Pastrana and Brian and all these DC athletes that you'd see his shoes are on the feet of like X Games royalty and Dave Mira and everything. But he was just a behind the scenes guy. As he started driving in rally, he became at the forefront. Then he did Gymkhana 5, which just snapped the internet in half. And ESPN always has this thing when they bring in new sports, like the mega ramp was invented by Bob Burnquist. And Bob did it in his house in San Diego, and he was just having people inviting him over. And he had a couple of like underground contests and everything that some of the massive skaters would just go hit it and huck over it and everything. And ESPN heard about that, and they said, Bob, it's very successful. Would you like to bring this to the show? And he said, yeah, of course. So they set it up at the show. Rob Dyrdek did the Street League skateboarding thing that became the street skateboarding at the show. You had to do an event before you got into the X Games. Everyone did that. The rally racing was done as its own, global rallycross before they got asked to appear at the X Games. Ken is the only athlete in the history of the X Games that they said, Ken, that thing that you did in San Francisco, can you bring that to Irwindale for the X Games? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm glad you asked. He had done a very small event, a Gymkhana event that was also at Irwindale with the promoter who did the Red Line Time Attack, actually. So Chris Willard, a good friend of mine. So Chris had produced this event, and then Chris was trying to start his own Gymkhana event, and Ken said, I want to work with you on that. They worked together. Chris said, I want to work with Nads. Brought me in. I hosted the live stream. I helped do some photography. It was crazy too, because actually at that event, Chris Harris the famed journalist from the UK, came and drove Ken's car around the course. And he actually did really well for someone who'd never driven a rallycross car before. So that was really impressive. And boy, Dai Yoshihara was out there. He won the rear wheel drive class, and he ended up competing with Tanner for the finals. Ken got knocked out in the finals, and Tanner and Dai competed for the win in that one. So that was a really crazy event. Sort of, again, on the periphery for that event, when ESPN called them, they said, open checkbook. We want you to bring Gymkhana 5 to what can you do? And he goes, well, it's not so much Gymkhana, the video, as much as a Gymkhana grid event that we want to do, that we've done. I did a little one, but I'd really love to do something big. And Brian called me up and goes, you're doing Time Attack, you do motorsports, you know how to present media, you know how to do this right. I want you to do this event. And I said, okay, when is it? And he goes, this year at the X Games. And I'm doing my math in the calendar. And I said, we're like 2 months away. And I go, and he goes, 52 days. And I said, okay, so we're 52 days away. I go, do you guys have anything in place yet? And he goes, no, we need you to build this. I hope your passport's in order because you have to go to Barcelona to the X Games to learn about how live TV works because I knew nothing about that too. And I said, okay, there's a guy named Dan Gordner. Love you, Dan. Dan Gordner is going to be your shepherd and he's going to usher you through all of ESPN world and live TV world. And you just need to build a rule set, find drivers, get everything to go, and then make it packaged up in 43 minutes or less because we've got a tight TV window because you're live on TV around the world. So, none of the cars can break down. If they do, how do you get them off the course? The course has to be super modular. The racing has to be super tight and everything. So I called Chris Willard up and I said, I need to help you design a course. And then I called a gentleman named Tony Circa from UMS Tuning. He's a time attack guy. And I said, I need you to help me build a rules package. And then I got with Dan Gordner from ESPN and we basically built an X Games event in 52 days. And we showed up and it was the single most successful launch at the X Games. I was in the booth up top watching what the scores because we had to do live timing and scoring. So there was another gentleman named James Gilbert. He does Monster Energy UK, one of Ken's sponsors, but he's in the UK and he sort of took over the mantle of Gymkhana Grid. And that's what you see in South Africa and all the events that Ken competes. Mm-hmm. He's the one who does that, but they do it on a really small ragtag budget. So I brought him and his group of zany Brits over. So I had this big mishmash of people trying to put everything together. And I had another guy named Nick DeZahn from Vegas Drift. I said, I need you to help me build this course. I mean, we were out there with those baseball lines doing the chalks, the chalk lines and everything, trying to mark up the thing because Ken wanted this massive production. ESPN said, we can't exactly recreate the streets of San Francisco for you,
Sure,
So we had to make it look bigger than it was and everything. But that was such a great time. And built that. It did really well. I mean, the people at ESPN were hugging me and saying, this is the best thing ever. And they go, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I got to go downstairs and clean up all these cones because they're going to put dirt in for the rallycross tomorrow. That's how quickly it changed at X Games that week. And they go, don't worry, you're going to have a job. I ended up meeting with Ken and them. The financing wasn't there. It was too soon again. The sponsorship wasn't there. And they said, we don't really have anything for you. And I said, okay. So I took off and I left and I ended up staying on with Hoonigan for like another 6 months doing marketing and trying to build the series into the following season. It just couldn't come together. Mm-hmm. And then that's what led me to a friend of mine calling me and saying, come to Saatchi for 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, Scotto goes, it's time for you to come back. And Toyota had moved at the time from Torrance to Texas, and I'm a Southern California native, born and raised. I have my kids here and everything. I didn't want to move, so they were trying to get me to go to they go, look at what kind of a house you could buy in Texas. I'm like, but it's in Texas, Right. So I didn't want to go to Texas, so I ended up just sort of kind of floating around and still staying at Saatchi, just waiting to see what was going to happen. And that's when Scotto called me and says, it's time for you to come back, and brought me back and came back at what was honestly the perfect time. I take zero credit for everything that the guys have done here. They'd already started Daily Transmission. It was already doing really well. I was trying to help Scotto start it, my first stint. He goes, I want to do daily content. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I want to do shows every day. And I said, I used to do that. I want to do that, So we talked about it and we were trying to plan it and couldn't get it together. Two creatives trying to figure out like a plan. It just absolutely didn't work. We had no producer, no one there to like keep us on track, and never came together. And then all of a sudden they started doing it. I remember texting Scotto the whole time, go, oh my God, you're doing it. You launched this and you're saying you're going to do it every day. I'm like, I hope you keep it up. And they go, we're doing content 4 days a week. Now we're doing content on Fridays too, 5 days a week. Now we're doing content 6 days. Okay, 6 days is too much. We're going back to 5 days, Now since we've gone back up to 6 days. So by the time I came back, it was already doing very well. So they launched the Daily Transmission platform in March of 2017. And I came in October of 2017. It was already like amazing, amazing success. So I got to be here I like to claim the beginning, but not really. It's like These guys, Vin and Scotto and Hurt and John Chase, they were the core hosts, and Teague behind the scenes does all it's basically like the Andy Hillman of Andy, who's the head writer from Top Gear, Andy Willman, I think the name is, I'm blanking on his name, but that's Teague to Scotto. Like he's the architect behind the scenes that really put everything together. And then we've since expanded it to do, Twitch live streams, and we're starting to go back to experiential, and we're talking about dusting off this Gymkhana Grid property and everything. So it's pretty exciting what we're doing right now.
There's a lot of passion here, which is very, very important. I don't have to tell you that. And there's also a lot of authenticity here, which I think is just as important.
Completely.
Yeah, so I greatly respect that, and I greatly appreciate that, because that's what I'm trying to do.
And it is a shame that we only have an hour,
But
that doesn't mean that we can't come back to this.
Let's do it again. We need to talk Hondas too, because as much as I joke about not being a Honda daddy, I do love Hondas, and I essentially fell into it at Super Street because they're like, you need to put a yellow Civic on the cover every month, and I'm like, Hondas, okay, I'm gonna learn about Hondas now, So I become the Honda daddy for better or for worse, but I do love Hondas, and I do have a deep, deep love and appreciation for Hondas. So next time we'll do a Honda special or something.
All right, John, tell people where they can find you.
Well, the best way to find us is on our Hoonigans YouTube channel. That's our number one thing. You could also get us at hoonigan.com on our website. I can't believe I'm such an old guy. I list the website second. But on Instagram, we're at the Hoonigans. And if you care to follow my worthless ramblings about old Hondas and old race cars and stuff, I'm at Nads on Instagram too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded and edited by me, Michael Senderovich. If you like the show, please leave me a review wherever you listen. It helps the show greatly. And finally, please follow me on Instagram at Road Stories Mike. Thanks so much for listening.